Hello, welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kate Harper of the 61st District in Montgomery County. On today's program, we're going to take a look forward at the next two-year session of the General Assembly. Pennsylvania has a new governor, and those of us in the legislature will be getting to know him and learning about his priorities. But another change in state government is the election of a new leadership team of House Republicans. Joining me now is the man charged with leading the caucus in working with the Senate and the governor to improve the Commonwealth. Representative Dave Reed from Indiana County is here. He's the newly elected majority leader. Representative Reed, welcome.
Kate, thank you very much for having me on the show today.
Great. What I'd like to do is let our audience know a little bit about you as a person. So I know you're from Indiana County. Most of them might not know where Indiana County is. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what your district looks like back home.
Sure, I'm from the western half of the state. I grew up in a small town called Homer City. Went to a very small high school named Homer Center High School, where I actually graduated with about 65 other students. Went off to college, not too far down the road, about 5 miles north, at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, better known as IUP, where I got a degree in mathematics and economics. Then I actually came out east for my graduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And when I was finishing up my graduate degree, went back home and ran for the state house for the first time at the age of 24. Was first elected at the age of 24 in 2002. Have served the folks of Indiana County for the last 12 years. And, most recently, was elected to be the next majority leader of the House Republican caucus. And my wife, Heather, and I have 3 young children: Joshua, age 6, Gracie, who just turned 5 last week, and our youngest daughter, Ellie, who turned 3.
Wow. So when you were home over the holiday break, you were busy.
Yeah, we really had a great time over Christmas and New Year's, enjoying the kids on their break from school. And now I think we're all anxious the kids to get back to school and for Heather and I to get back to work, and really looking forward to the upcoming legislative session.
All right, now you're the majority leader, which means basically that the Republican House Caucus elected you to lead us into the new session, right?
Yeah, basically their internal leadership elections, where my job is to negotiate with the House Democrats, negotiate with the Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats, and ultimately with the administration on major public policy initiatives important to each and every one of our caucus members, as well as each and every one of our 13 million residents across the state of Pennsylvania.
So I think some of my constituents are probably pretty familiar with the congressional scene and John Boehner, who's had the role of majority leader there. But I don't think they think too much about the General Assembly and what your role would be. When you say negotiate, what would you negotiate?
One of the major issues every year that is the top priority for the state is negotiating the state budget. And when you look at the issues that will probably be at the forefront over the next 6 months, most of them will be budget related in one form or another. So my responsibility will be to represent the interests of our caucus and their constituents at the budget table with the governor, with the Senate, with the House Democrats, to make sure we get a reasonable spending plan in place, and hopefully we do it by June 30th.
Right. Well, we have a constitutional obligation to do a balanced budget by June 30th, and this year it has some challenges, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does have some challenges. Folks have been projecting anywhere close to a $2 billion budget deficit. And unlike the federal government, the state cannot print money. We can't have deficit spending. At the end of every year, we've got to have a balanced budget in place. It makes for some very difficult decisions on occasion, but ultimately, I think the state's economy and the state's budgetary situation is probably in a better situation than the federal government, because we are forced to make those decisions each and every year.
Right, we have to prioritize how much money's coming in, how much money's going out, and where is it going.
Well, and that's really the key, determining what are the core functions of government and prioritizing spending accordingly, because, you always have an unlimited amount of spending that folks desire, but you have a limited amount of resources to meet those desires. So our job as legislators as a whole are to balance the needs with the available funds and make those spending decisions accordingly.
Our new governor has already indicated that he's looking for more taxes. Is that going to put you in a tough spot?
I think the governor has every right to put forth his platform. We've heard in general terms at the 30,000-foot level, the ideas he had during the campaign. Sometimes ideas during a campaign translate into public policy, other times not so much. So, we'll hear his budget priorities in his inaugural address and then also with his budget presentation in March. And then it will be our responsibility as a legislature to evaluate those priorities and then determine, okay, what are reasonable, what are not reasonable, and what's in the best interest of the people of Pennsylvania.
Right. Now, some people have said that it's going to be, gridlock here in Pennsylvania, which we haven't had because of the difference between the governor being a Democrat and the House and Senate both being majority Republican. Do you see it coming out as gridlock?
I think we've got an incredible opportunity to not turn into Washington, D.C., where it doesn't seem like anybody wants to talk to anybody else. We've got a governor who's coming into office with a decent electoral victory, but we also have a legislature that came back with a very good electoral victory as well. And I think the public, what it demanded is not dysfunction, but a legitimate discussion on both sides of public policy issues, and ultimately would like to see compromise come out at the end.
Well, understanding that just about everything has some budgetary implications, are there other things, other issues that you think Pennsylvania will be dealing with this year?
I think there are a number of issues that kind of come into that arena of public policy items that have budgetary implications. Certainly pension reform is the #1 cost driver to the state budget, each and every school district's budget, and really the ultimate driver in property tax increases. If you look at it from a broader perspective, I think probably bringing our liquor system into the 21st century in one way, shape, or form, both from a consumer perspective, but also from a monetary perspective. And I think folks are going to want to talk about, our tax system as a whole. How do we have a competitive business tax climate? What is the appropriate way to tax the natural gas industry? And, probably some discussion on, are property taxes still the best way to fund public education across the Commonwealth?
All right, I think those are all issues that we touched on last session, and some of them we've been talking about for years. But let's hit the big one. I think natural gas is a big thing for Pennsylvania. How do you feel about that?
It's an incredible opportunity. It's been wonderful from a jobs perspective. Almost 100,000 new jobs related to the industry created during a recessionary period across the Commonwealth. It's been great from the consumer perspective. We're paying record low natural gas prices to heat our homes and actually having a great impact on electricity prices as well, bringing them down for the consumer. We do have a great responsibility from an environmental perspective to have the proper regulations in place to make sure we don't get into a situation where we're regretting this opportunity from an environmental perspective in the future, and then from a taxation perspective. Certainly I'm sure folks will want to have a discussion on a severance tax in Pennsylvania, and it's a very legitimate discussion to have. We just need to make sure when we're having that discussion, we're actually looking at the complete picture. What are the total taxes a company is paying in Pennsylvania versus another state, and is a severance tax a more fair way and more equitable way of taxing the industry as opposed to corporate taxes? I don't know.
They are paying.
Yeah, I mean, they're paying corporate taxes, they're paying personal income taxes, they're paying the impact fee as well, which has brought in almost $800 million over 3.5 years.
Yeah, people keep saying they're not taxed at all, and to me, I don't understand that.
Yeah, there's an incredible amount of revenue coming in from the industry through corporate taxes and impact fees, and we want to make sure particularly the impact fees stay in place because they're being used to help offset the impacts with the local communities actually dealing with the drilling and to fund very important environmental programs that impact the entire state.
Well, I won't lobby you on this because it would be unfair, but I do have a bill that would do that. So just keep that in the back of your mind in case we get into the debate. Now let's talk about pensions a little bit. Why are pensions a problem for Pennsylvania?
I think you have a pension system that has a great deal of legacy cost to it. We've got almost $50 billion in unfunded liabilities, and certainly folks have been pointing fingers for a number of years as to who's responsible for creating those unfunded liabilities. Well, the biggest boogeyman out there is really the recession of 2008. When the market crashed, the pension funds lost $30 billion in 6 months. That's very difficult to recover from in a very short time frame. So, it's the #1 cost driver, as we talked about, for school districts,
Sure is.
for the Commonwealth.
That's because school districts and the Commonwealth share the cost of those school teacher pensions, basically.
And I think what most folks don't realize is the state is responsible for picking up the entire tab for the employer contribution for state employees
Right.
in relation to their pension. But we also pick up almost 50% of the cost for school districts' employees.
And actually, there are many more teachers and retired teachers than there are state workers
Absolutely.
or retired state workers. I mean, the teacher pension system is huge by comparison to the state system.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
They're both in trouble financially.
They both have some difficulties ahead, and we have a responsibility to our retirees to make sure their retirement is secure, to our active employees to make sure that they came into the situation understanding their retirement was going to be in one form, that they continue to have that retirement. But for new folks going forward, we need to create a system that creates some stability and predictability, not just for the retiree, but also for the taxpayer, because ultimately these pensions are funded in part by taxpayer dollars. They're funded by the employee and the employer, and the employer in this case is the taxpayer.
Right. I want to emphasize something that you just said, because I don't want retired teachers or other school employees to be worried about this. We have every intention of making the payments that they've earned and that are due to them, don't we?
Well, I think that's the big thing. For far too long, folks have put off making pension payments to the pension funds, both from the Commonwealth level and the school district level. And I think the number one priority we must have going forward is to make those payments in their entirety, make them on time, and get the pension fund back to stability as far as its funding level for those retirees and for those active employees to actually have a pension to draw down once they retire.
So we have to worry about the people who have earned a pension, and we have to make sure we have the money there to pay them. We also have to worry about school taxpayers, because since school boards are charged with paying half of the employer's share, the school taxes have been going up just to make these pension payments in some cases.
Well, and that is the number one cost driver for local school districts and the number one cause of property tax increases over the last 5 or 6 years. And ultimately, you have situations where it's not just the taxpayer in general, but oftentimes the school district employees or retirees are those same taxpayers. So they have an interest as well in making sure that system has some sanity to it in the years ahead, so that they are able to foot the bill in a reasonable fashion.
I think something that is seldom talked about is Act 1. I know you were in the General Assembly and supported that when we passed that bill. You want to talk a little bit about how that's helping us curb school property taxes?
Yeah, Act 1 basically limits property tax increases to the rate of inflation on every single year. Now, there are exceptions. There used to be 8 or 9 exceptions that school districts could apply to the Department of Education to be able to go above the rate of inflation without actually putting it on a referendum for the local school district constituents to approve or disapprove of. We narrowed down those exceptions to 3 just a couple years ago, and the 3 were existing debt that came into existence, not new debt, but existing debt that the school district has to pay for, special education costs, because they can be somewhat unpredictable, depending on any given school year, how many special ed students you have enrolled within the district, and if they're, a high value or a low value, cost associated with that special education student. And then the third exception was pension costs. So certainly, taking care of the pension situation as a whole helps alleviate that cause for property tax increases.
I recently saw an article in our local newspaper about a teacher contract in my area that was settled, where both sides agreed in advance that they would not go over the Act 1 index. And I think it's had that effect on many union salary negotiations in my area, because the school board says we're not going to referendum, and I think the union agrees that that'll be the starting point. And that means that the increases have been lower since we passed Act 1 than they would have been otherwise.
Well, and I think it really has helped constrain those sort of increases. I think initially you had a lot of school districts that would apply for every single exemption known to man, just in case something happened during the school year where they needed increased spending. But now, as the school districts have become more comfortable with operating under Act 1, you see most school districts now saying, look, we're not going to apply for any exemptions, and we are committed to keeping our spending increases below the rate of inflation.
And we're not going to the voters on a referendum, which is the alternative if you don't keep your spending down.
Correct.
Most of them recognize that that would be a non-starter.
Correct.
So I think Act 1 is something that most newspapers pay very little attention to, and most voters are not conscious of. It's something our General Assembly passed several years ago, and it's actually working to help us on school property taxes.
Well, and I think it's a perfect example of doing something that actually works. And when you do something that works, oftentimes it doesn't garner the media attention as something that doesn't work. But in the end, it's been a tremendous benefit to the taxpayers of the Commonwealth. Right,
I agree. We're going to have to take a quick break. Legislative Report will return in just a moment. Stay with us.
Did you know that the Pennsylvania Farm Show's history goes all the way back to 1851? Originally organized as a state fair by the Pennsylvania Agricultural Society, it was discontinued in 1899. It wasn't until 1916 that Charles Patton, the Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture, worked with others to develop a new agricultural fair which debuted in January 1917. It was in 1925 that the roots were laid for the farm show that we know today. The show had grown so large that 40,000 attendees were traveling to various sites all around Harrisburg. During this year, the Pennsylvania State Department of Agriculture took control of the event, and the legislature had decided to appropriate money that gave birth to the Farm Show complex. Finally, in 1931, the main exhibition building opened and welcomed 150,000 visitors to the show that year. Over the years, the farm show has continued to grow. Various events showcasing animals, products, and skills were added to the event. The farm show complex has also continued to grow, with more buildings and arenas being added over the years. The count stands at 24 acres inside 11 buildings and 3 arenas. Today, the show hosts approximately 6,000 animals, 10,000 competitive exhibits, and 300 commercial exhibits, along with over 500,000 visitors. Since the doors to the main exhibition building opened, the farm show has become the world's biggest indoor agricultural event. Now you know.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual, and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. My guest today is Representative Dave Reed, the Majority Leader of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. We're discussing priorities for the next 2-year session, which is just starting now. Now, Dave, some of the things we need to talk about are what else does the General Assembly do when we're not doing the budget or the big things that people see and hear about on the news?
You know, I think a lot of folks look at the legislature and look at the governor for that matter and only pay attention to the big ticket items that are out there. Budgets, pension reform, liquor privatization, Marcellus Shell, you know, those sort of items that always seem to be in the headlines or on the evening news. whereas most of our time is actually consumed with a number of other items that may be important but not be a top tier item, or may be important to one region of the state but not as important to another region of the state. And we've been very successful in working in a very bipartisan fashion in moving those agenda items forward. In fact, most of those agenda items pass unanimously. Republicans, Democrats working together, how government's supposed to operate, working with our colleagues in the Senate and working with the previous governor and hopefully with the new governor coming into office as well. And we've been very successful in passing a number of agenda items focused on areas like welfare reform, focused on child abuse, in one form or another, particularly in light of the Penn State situation from a couple years ago, and just very important agenda items that can make a real difference in the lives of our everyday citizens.
People are totally amazed when I tell them we get about 4,000 bills in every 2-year session. Now, of them, a few hundred get debated, and of them, a few dozen make it to the governor's desk. But we're working on all kinds of subjects, and I think most people don't realize that we did a package of bills that was 17, 18, 20 bills on child sex abuse to bring Pennsylvania's laws up to date with respect to that after the Penn State scandal.
Well, and it was unfortunate that it took a scandal like occurred at Penn State to push that legislation forward, but it was also an incredible opportunity to bring our laws into the 21st century. Oftentimes, it's not just bringing the laws into the 21st century, it's updating the laws in regard to technology that exists today that may not have existed 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it's not just in the realm of child abuse legislation, but look at the legislation we considered a couple years ago with texting while driving. Sometimes we've got to update the laws accordingly as technology changes.
Right, and also a few years ago I worked with Representative Kathy Watson from nearby Bucks County to me on the DUI laws, the driving under the influence, and we were able to get those bills, the child sex abuse bills, the drunk driving bills. Those bills went through without a lot of debate because the committee system worked and produced good legislation. Now, do you see that you're going to have a problem dealing either with our caucus? I mean, we're very large, we're very diverse in terms of what our home districts look like, and then you have to deal with the Senate as well.
Well, I think the first step to working towards resolution on issues is helping individual members understand the different perspectives, whether they exist within the caucus, within the House as a whole, or within the General Assembly as a whole with our colleagues in the Senate. And both sides need to understand that, different people feel differently about any given issue. And it's not necessarily that one person's good and one person's bad. It's just we each represent 64,000 people. And sometimes, the definition of perfect in Clearfield County with their 64,000 people is going to be a little bit different than the definition of perfect in Delaware County. And both sides kind of need to understand that each person is representing their constituents when they come to the Capitol. And if we're going to get anything done on, small issues, big issues, the issues of the day, it's going to require folks to compromise and to work with one another to try to move the ball forward to make the situation better for our entire state, not just their home community.
Well, I think there's a big learning curve. I'm sure you experienced this. I'm from a suburban Philadelphia community. I went to college in Philadelphia. I'd been to Pittsburgh a few times. I'd been to York. I'd been to Lancaster. I'd been to Harrisburg. But I really didn't understand how things look in Indiana County. I'll just give you a little example. When we were working on the transportation bill, I asked a rural legislator, what would it take to get you to vote for this bill? Naturally, we were all reluctant to do anything with a gas tax. He said, I need more money for dirt and gravel roads. Well, I'll be fair. I don't have a single dirt or gravel road, it's municipally or state owned in my entire district. I never thought about dirt and gravel roads. So I think that there's a learning curve so that you see that other people's district doesn't look like yours. Not every district looks like suburban Philadelphia.
Well, and I think that kind of amplifies the need for individual legislators not just to exist within their own legislative district, but take the time, take the opportunity to learn about other areas of the state as well. In an area like mine, the Dirt and Gravel Road program is very important, not just from a transportation perspective, but from an environmental perspective, because it keeps the runoff from coming off of those roads into the local streams. From Indiana County, I probably did not understand the true definition of traffic until I went to graduate school in the city of Philadelphia, where, I got to see what traffic really was and congestion really looked like. So I think that opportunity to share experiences and to also share communities is very important to the job of a legislator.
But I also think that it helps us be more bipartisan.
It does.
Because, for example, and I'll go back to transportation because I think it was a success. We were able to take care of dirt and gravel roads. We also found money for SEPTA and mass transit. And some people who don't have any buses or trains or subways or anything in their districts understood that that was a need in one part of the state or another.
Well, I think on mass transit in particular, and I had this discussion a great deal with constituents back at home in Indiana County, where it was not just about, buses and rail systems in Pittsburgh and Philly, but in rural Pennsylvania, mass transit oftentimes is the shared ride program that helps take senior citizens to and from medical appointments, and folks don't necessarily associate that with mass transit.
Right, so they want to know where their money's going, and you can tell them
Exactly.
you're getting some of it. It's coming back here to help us. So I think those were all learning things. How about getting along with the Senate? We don't always get along with the Senate, even if we're both wearing the same T-shirt, Republican.
I'm very hopeful that we'll have a good relationship with the newly elected leaders in the Senate. I think Senator Scarnati, Senator Corman, are very good individuals who represent their areas and their body well, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a good relationship with them going forward.
And what about our new governor? He's brand new on the political scene, really, other than his service as Revenue Secretary for Governor Rendell. And he's a Democrat. Do you think we'll be able to get along with him and get stuff done together?
I think a lot will be dependent upon the approach he takes. Certainly if he takes the approach of it's my way or the highway, certainly there are going to be some roadblocks put up by a number of folks. And, certainly going to need to have a little bit of room for compromise. But if he takes a businessman's approach of recognizing he's got one set of priorities, we've got another set of priorities, and there are opportunities to meet in the middle where we can both find success, I think it could be a very encouraging upcoming legislative session.
Well, that sounds hopeful, and I think that should be comforting for my constituents back home. Are there other things that you think that people in the southeastern part of the state need to understand about Pennsylvania, and maybe we don't because our media doesn't cover it?
I think it's just important to realize, all parts of Pennsylvania view public policy items just a little bit differently than other parts of Pennsylvania. And, sometimes it's always good to have some experiences that reflect those differences of opinion. And, as I said, one of the best experiences I ever had coming from a rural community was living in an urban environment for a couple of years. And I think sometimes folks in an urban environment or suburban environment, could benefit from taking the time to learn a little bit more about a rural environment. And I think ultimately, in the end, public policy making is fairly simple as it's set up in a representative democracy. In our country, we have a freedom of speech component where each side can express at the top of their lungs that of which they believe. And, ultimately, generally, both sides take that opportunity to do so. But the second component to a representative democracy is, once folks are done with the screaming and done with the expressing their different viewpoints, the founders did intend for a democracy to work with both sides coming together and compromising, making decisions, moving the ball forward, and getting results for the folks that we represent.
And ultimately, do you see Pennsylvania as a place where we can meet in the middle on most issues or many issues?
I think we can. I think there are great examples of us doing it in the past. The transportation proposal, as you talked about, was a great example of Republicans working with Democrats, the Senate working with the House, working with the governor, and all trying to move the ball in the right direction to help the people of Pennsylvania. And I think we're going to have some opportunities to do that over the next 2 years as well.
Well, and I really think that's what our constituents want. So that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. If you need assistance with any state government matter, please feel free to contact me at my local office. The address and number will be shown in just a moment on your screen. Thanks for watching. Join me again for Legislative Report.